1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab. It is Monday, so you know what time that means. It's time to look at the showdown slate for tonight. Got a two-gamer tonight, Titans at Dolphins, Seahawks at Lions. For this show, we'll be focusing on that second game, the Seahawks and the Lions. As always, purpose of the show, build a lineup on DraftKings and really use that as a vehicle to talk through strategy, in this case for tonight. I'm your host, Cheeseman. I would love if you give the video a like or subscribe to the channel if you find value in this content. And with that, time to welcome up Xandamere to talk showdown. Xandamere, as always, we've talked about this before. You've got kids, you're going to be up early anyway, but still appreciate you being up early over there. Is the sun even up yet?
Not at this time of year. I know, in fact, I just learned that you, in fact, are also a native Oregonian. You know, I'm from California, right. From Southern California. And one of the things that surprised me the most about moving to Oregon was how different the day-night cycle is throughout the year. As it gets like into winter, the sun comes up later, right? Like the length of the days, just going from California to Oregon changes so much. It was really surprising.
So just you get like basically more daylight in California, like during even like the shorter seasons.
Yeah, but in the summer, the sun's up at 5 a.m. It doesn't set till 10 at night. So it's wild how it changes like that.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you being up. How was week 3 for you? Any just thoughts on week 3 and just overall?
Yeah, week 3 was all right. I feel I ended up slightly down. I had a lineup make it to 10th in a I'm in a big tournament. There's a stack around the Green Bay Vikings game, which was, Mike Johnson, one of our content writers, actually identified that on Sunday morning. He said, hey, the more I think about this, the more I like this game. And he shared that in our Discord with our customers. So nice. the more I like it, the more I think about it, the more I like this game, the more I think that, this could be kind of a sneaky or shootout spot. Unfortunately, the game put up a lot of points, but it was sort of a weird quote unquote shootout in that we think a shootout's back and forth. And in this case, it was like the Vikings scored all the points early and then they stopped. And then the Packers scored all the points late. And so it kind of capped the Vikings a little bit. But Jordan Addison had a good game. And then if you were on the Packers side with Jordan Love and you had Reed or Wicks or Tucker Kraft, that was the setup to the perfect lineup was basically building around the Packers offense.
Yeah, I wish I had more of that game. I did have a lot of Jaden Reed and Aaron Jones. And, man, Aaron Jones, it just felt like, get in the end zone at some point. He just never did. But I was scared away by the Brian Flores defense. And, shame on me because I'm a Packers fan. I just did not believe. Week 3 for me, I felt great about my process. I feel like it was probably the sharpest week in terms of process and being prepared and feeling good about where I was going into Sunday, but just had a lot of Kyler Murray. I had plenty of Nico Collins, but as I look back at my lineups, I basically cashed one lineup out of like 20 or so that I put in. It just felt that like even in lineups that didn't have Kyler Murray, they didn't have Nico Collins. In lineups with Nico Collins in them had Kyler Murray. And again, had a lot of Jaden Reed, had a lot of that game, like those mini correlations, but Kyler Murray ultimately took me down, man. So,
that game was a disappointment, especially the Cardinals were a disappointment, right? Like that was, and it's any game can fail, right? Any offense can fail. Any offense can succeed and score a lot of real life points, but do so in a fantasy unfriendly way. It doesn't generate good DFS scores. But the Cardinals, who had been looking like a very good offense so far all season, failing utterly against one of the worst defenses in the NFL was it's one of those things where you're just like, well, it's football any given Sunday, right?
It's true. Yeah. I will say though, that my weekend, it would have been a bad weekend, except props basically saved me. I basically broke even on the weekend because some of the props, that you guys dropped, this was in the pick'em kind of section, hit a 5-legger on underdog and was just, basically broke even for the week. And so that's the one thing I love about props is just that you can kind of spread your risk a little bit more than if you're just playing DFS and end up actually kind of evening out some of the losses. And that happened for me. So great job on props. How was the weekend for you guys and how's props going for you guys?
Yeah, thank you. Props is going well so far. I would say NFL is NFL props are hard. We like to say that props are, easier than DFS, and that's true. NFL props are hard because they're the biggest market. right? So
Exactly.
sports books spend the most sort of effort trying to build good lines, tough lines for NFL props. So, we had a fine weekend. We do a few different types of bets. We do what are called straight bets, which is like kind of bets you'd think of normally when you think of a prop bet. Brees Hall over 66.5 rushing yards, which was of course a disaster. I don't know what happened to Brees Hall this weekend.
Jets fan, yeah.
Then we do what are called pick'ems, which you mentioned, underdog, right? Pick'ems are legal in states where props aren't often. The legality is different, and so there are some states where you might not have access to a sports book like FanDuel or DraftKings, but you can have access to something like an underdog or a prize picks, and you can do pick'ems. The difference there is you have to build. You can't do single bets. Every slip you enter has to have at least 2 bets, and that's how it's a legal gray area where they call it fantasy sports instead of props. We did really well there. We had, I think we try to give out what we think is a correlated pick for each game. And we did really, really well on that. As you mentioned, you hit a 5-legger on that. Fitting a 5-legger pays off 20-1 on underdog.
Yes.
And then we do what are called alternate lines, where like instead of saying betting Brees Hall over 65.5 rushing yards, and it's basically a 2 for 1. If you win, you double your money roughly, minus a little bit of juice that the book charges. Instead of that, you'd say like Brees Hall over 100 rushing yards, and if it hits, it pays off 3-1 or 4-1. And so we do those as well. And those we had several that were super, super close, right? We had two on, we had one on Noah Brown and one on Darnell Mooney. In both cases, near the end of the game, they got a defensive pass interference call on a ball that had they caught it, it would have put them over their alternate line and made a bunch of money. Yeah. We had Amari Cooper, who had a 75 or 80-yard catch called back. So, those are tough, right? Like football always swings on these like little areas of variance. And you get those things, those plays, those DPI calls, the guy bobbles it, the guy, falls down, whatever, right? Like, we had Trevor Lawrence just miss a wide open Christian Kirk that would have cashed his lines. Once in Christian Kirk because his matchup was so great. So, that's going to happen, right? That's the variance that happens over the season. Yeah. I will say the one thing I like about props is that at the end of the day, at the end of the season, because there are so many, you get the result you deserve, right? Like in DFS, especially if you're just playing main slates, there's only a few of them on the season. You can be a really good DFS player and have a losing season because there just aren't that many weeks for that positive expected value to actually be realized in like a tournament win. And so really good DFS players can have losing years. And that's why also we look at playing like early only slates, afternoon only slates. We like Showdown for this reason, because the more slates you enter, assuming you are a plus EV player, the more slates you enter, the more of a chance you give yourself to realize that positive expected value. Right. And props are kind of the same in that you have so many that over time, like any given day, any given week, you're going to variance. Right. But over the course of a full season, say like NFL and NBA, which is our bread and butter for props, you're going to get, you're going to make hundreds of bets. And so the luck kind of comes out in the wash and you get the result that you deserve based on how well you pick. Yesterday was also a fun day for me because it was the end of MLB season. And we always place a bunch of Major League Baseball player futures. And so a future is, instead of a prop that's like for one game, one day, a future would be like you bet on their season outcome. So like Brees Hall over 1,012 or over 1,200 rushing yards for the course of the season, that kind of thing, right? And we had 20 MLB futures last year, and we ended up going 14-6. And so, the end of the season is the day those all get finalized by the books and all the money gets deposited in your account. It's like, yay, happy birthday to me. It's like seeing all this money pop up is fun.
Yes. That is awesome. I love how you broke that down. Just that, like, because there's so many bets, you have a large enough sample size that because of the edge that exists within the props package that OWS runs, that you headed up over there, that sample size, your edge is going to play out in your favor over time. And you have that bigger sample size. If people want to learn more about props, the package that 1 Week Season has, where can they go?
oneweekseason.com. It's linked on the front page, or at the very top, there's a section of like little navigation bars, and there's I don't actually remember the navigation bar it's under, but if you mouse over the navigation bars, they make a little drop down, and you can see props up there. We have week passes, month passes, and then a whole year pass. If you just want to try it out and see if you like it, you can get a week pass. Where OWS is, we try to be a super customer friendly site. So, if you get a week pass and you try it and you're like, this isn't for me. I'm not available to get the bets at the time they post them, or I can't follow it. I'm not fast enough to get the bet. Like, if you try it and you don't like it, and you want, and contact us and we'll give you a refund. We're super customer friendly. We want people to try it out. The cool thing about props, and the reason I love it personally, is it's everyone can win. In DFS, even when OWS has a really sharp week of analysis, which I think we did this week, even we had a really good week. The nature of DFS is that only a small number of people are going to still win, like hit a tournament win in a given week. Whereas with props, we can all win, and it's fun celebrating that. It's fun seeing everyone making money, as opposed to like cheering for, my lineups are dead and I'm cheering for you, which is still cool. Like, I like cheering for other people and seeing them do well, but it's more fun when everyone gets to win.
I agree. Yep, man. I remember there's been more than one, 6-0, 7-0, 8-0 NBA nights where the whole Discord is popping. It's a lot of fun.
God.
So yeah, guys.
Yeah, those are good. Those are fun.
Yeah, check it out for sure. Again, they have every sport. The props package, you can look at the numbers. It's been successful. The edge is real. So, and like you said, try a week. If you don't like it, they'll, give you your money back. So, awesome. Xandamere, thanks for the info there. Let's jump into Showdown here, and I'm going to just pull up DraftKings. And again, we're looking at this Seahawks at Lions tonight. Lions are favored by 4. What's your initial thought on this game? The Vegas line, some ways this could play out.
So the team, there's always a team. There's usually a team that the game kind of hinges on, right? Like this, here's the team that needs to keep up, or in order to make this game, a highly scoring game. For me, that team is the Seahawks, right? I think that we don't know who the Seahawks are. I think that we know who the Lions are, largely, right? We know what the Lions offense is. They're largely the same personnel as last year. We pretty much know who they are and what they do. The Seahawks are also largely the same offensive personnel as last year, at least. But what we don't know is how good they are, because, yeah, they're 3-0, and that's obviously off to a great start. But they've played Denver, New England, and Miami. And so, like, they're not exactly going through a murderer's row of NFL teams here. Like, Denver, they beat, Denver has actually looked better than I thought they would, primarily due to their defense. The Seahawks beat them 26-20. And they went to New England. New England also, like, they can play teams tough because their defense is really good. Their offense is absolute hot trash. So they beat New England at home 23-20, and then they curb stomped the Dolphins 24-3, of course, without Tua Tagovailoa. I don't know how to pronounce his name.
No, it's a tough one. Just
if you're new to OWS,
I always just go Tua because I'm just gonna not try.
If you're new to OWS, a sort of running joke is the fact that I cannot pronounce NFL player names. But yeah, Geno Smith and the Seahawks, they're 3-0, but are they good? I don't know, right? It's worth noting that they gave up. I mean, their defense gave up 20 points to the Broncos and 20 points to the Patriots, who were not exactly great offenses. So, I think the Lions are probably in a pretty good spot here. And then I think the Seahawks offense is capable, right? They've got some really good pass catchers, especially, but their defense, I think, is, I don't know, right? I just don't know. And that's the thing we have to decide on. We build our lineups is like, what angle do we want to take? We could take the angle of this is going to be a high scoring, likely back and forth affair, but the Lions probably pull it out. And that's kind of what the Vegas line says, right? High score, Lions favored in a relatively close spread. Or we can take a different approach and say, I think the line is wrong. I think that we don't know. I think the Seahawks are not as good as their record has made them look.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna pull up a line or a contest here. We typically go kind of smaller field single entry, so I'm just gonna jump into the hard count. It's actually only 411 entries. Is that fine, or you want to go something a little? I don't know if there's something a little bigger.
That's fine.
Hard count's good. Okay.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, kind of as we're opening this up, any sense on how the field is seeing this game and will likely play it? Do they want to play more of a shootout, or do you think the field is thinking that Detroit's probably just gonna crush here at home, and so more onslaught builds? Any sense as we kind of start into this lineup building process?
Yeah, so generally speaking, people like building for overs because they're more fun. Right. We tend to like rooting for stuff rather than against stuff. By the way, this actually ties back to props. People like betting overs when unders are.
I feel exposed right now because that's how I build too.
it's more fun to build for over games, right? Like you want to see touchdowns scored, you want to see big plays. And so over games tend to be like, and I don't think a lot of people realize they're building for an over game or an under game necessarily, right? And I think that people think about, just putting in good plays, but like it's more fun to play pass catchers or running backs than it is to play kickers or defenses, right?
Yeah.
And so we just don't think about how we're building and what kind of scenario we're building for a lot of the time. You just kind of plug in the players and it sort of happens on its own. So I think that when you say are we building for overs, I think most people do that kind of anyhow. Is my general take.
If I can just jump in real fast, a lot of times when I look at a game like a showdown game, like I want to play showdown tonight, but I look at a game and I say I think this is going to be a slugfest with not a lot of points scored. A lot of times I don't even know, like I can't envision how, like it's so, like you said, it's so easy to think, hey, like for this game, for example, Seattle's going to be chasing points, so I'm going to go Geno double stack, and I can see Geno throwing 3 touchdowns in a comeback effort, and so I'm going to build off that scenario because I can see that playing out in my head. But it's so hard to think like, okay, how are the points going to be scored if it's a 17-14 game? That's my struggle. So I don't know how you really play off of that, but I think that is like probably the hardest thing for me to get my mind around in terms of showdown.
Yeah. So for low scoring games, the way I think about it is you want to prioritize plays that can succeed without touchdowns. Okay. Right. And you also want to think about lower scoring plays are more likely to end up in winning lineups, right? Don't use much ceiling per play. And also because there aren't a lot of touchdowns scored, it's pretty important to try and get the ones that are scored. So how that plays out in terms of picking players, one, kickers and defenses are more likely to be optimal because kickers generally don't have the ceiling of, other players, except for those really rare ones like that Washington, New York game where it was like 18 field goals kicked or whatever in week 2. So kickers are more likely to be optimal. Defense is more likely to be optimal because they start with 10 points. And if you're not losing a bunch of points from scoring, then they're more likely to, a couple sacks and turnovers. They don't necessarily need a pick 6 or anything. In higher scoring games, defenses can still be optimal, but you generally need a defensive touchdown most of the time.
Right. Oh, that's good stuff.
Little punt plays, like cheaper punt players, are more likely to be optimal if they catch a touchdown. So, like for example, sometimes you see like slates where like a tight end 2 or tight end 3 has a line of like 1 catch for 6 yards and a touchdown. That's more likely to be optimal on a lower scoring game. Except there's an except here. Except when that guy is like minimum salary, because then sometimes that guy can just be, even if you only get 6 or 7 points, if all the high scoring guys put up big scores and he lets you get one more high scoring guy in there, he can still fit in an optimal. And then finally, quarterbacks are devalued because quarterback scoring, at least pocket passer quarterbacks like the 2 we have tonight, because their scoring tends to accumulate through touchdowns, not as much through yardage. So like if a quarterback throws for 250 yards but no touchdowns, that's only 10 points. Then a touchdown's 4 points, right? So going for each touchdown is a significant portion of QB scoring, whereas in the DraftKings PPR format, a receiver, especially like say a guy like JSN on the Seattle. This is my pronunciation again. JSN on the Seahawks.
JSN's easier.
He can rack up points. I mean, he had a 25 fantasy point game, 26 fantasy point game in week 2 with no touchdowns on the strength of 12 catches. And so you can get PPR points that get you there, while the quarterbacks really need touchdowns in order to be viable. So low scoring games devalue the quarterbacks, and that's also a hard one because quarterbacks tend to project really well, and we also were used to saying, well, if I'm playing pass catchers, I want to think about playing their quarterback, and so like the most showdown, I haven't looked at this in a while, but generally speaking, in an average showdown, it's going to vary depending on who's playing, right? Lamar Jackson's generally going to be higher owned than Geno Smith, but generally speaking, something like 80-ish% of all lineups entered are going to contain a quarterback, at least one, and so just not having a quarterback in those low scoring game builds is a way to differentiate from the field.
Man, that's great stuff. And just even 5 minutes of you explaining, I already feel like I'm like, okay, like low scoring game, guys that can get there without touchdowns, defenses, kickers are, and quarterbacks are devalued. That's great stuff. Okay, so let's look at this lineup. Where you want to start here at captain?
So I'm actually going to start with my overall favorite play in the game. And it's funny because I talked about how I think the Seahawks might be a little bit fraudulent, and specifically their defense. And so I'm going to start with my very favorite play in the game, and that is JSN.
Love it.
So he's down at 9,900 for captain. So Jay, let me explain why. One is the Lions are a pass funnel defense. The Lions are just monstrous against the run. Seattle has a primary running back who is not heavily involved in the passing game in Kenneth Walker. And so he's out on the field. He's not likely to soak targets. He'll get a couple. But it's likely we're going to see Seattle choose a pass-heavier game plan in order to attack. Lions generally face a higher rate of passing because teams aren't idiots. They know the Lions are elite against the run. And you've got to keep some level of balance in your offense because the worst sin you can commit in the NFL is being too predictable on offense. But I expect we're going to see a higher rate of passing, and we did see this, by the way, when the Seahawks visited the Patriots. The Patriots are another really good run defense, and the Seahawks went pass heavy from early in the game. Geno Smith attempted 44 passes in that game, compared to 25 against Denver, 34 against Miami. So what that tells me is some teams kind of go out and they just start the game by running their offense, and which is stupid. Right? Like they're not trying to adjust for their opponent. They're just kind of like, this is what we do. We're going to try to do it well. And I don't think that's very bright. The Seahawks have shown so far this season that they will design their offense based on who they're playing. And so I have confidence that we're going to see an elevated pass volume from the Seahawks in this game from the get-go. And then the Lions are also favorites, which tells me that if that game plays out that way, if the Lions win, we're likely to see elevated pass volume as the Seahawks trail and try to come back later in the game. So elevated pass volume is a road underdog. The Seahawks are also a more concentrated offense. The Seahawks basically have two primary pass catchers, and then Tyler Lockett at this point in his career is he's a tertiary pass catcher. He's still good, but he's a tertiary pass catcher. And then they have a good running back. But again, the matchup is so horrible. I think we're really going to see a lot of the Seahawks offense concentrated in the passing game in JSN and DK Metcalf, whereas the Lions have a much more spread out offense. They have two really good running backs and three really good pass catchers. And so it's a little harder to say, where's the Lions production going to come from, given the weapons they have?
Yeah, I completely hear you there. So yeah, because like you mentioned in your write-up, the comparison to the 49ers. Really, it's hard to really look at the Lions. It's kind of a guessing game as far as where they're going to go because there isn't really one stud, maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown, but still, he can be kind of, he's had some games where he's had elevated targets and then games where he takes more of a back seat.
Yeah. So, Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously a stud, but he's priced like one. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is priced pretty fairly in this. He doesn't look like a value to me. So,
yeah, absolutely. Right. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So, JSN at the captain. Where do we want to go next here?
Yeah. So next I'm going to plug in Geno Smith, and I will say I generally like to pair a captain pass catcher with his quarterback. There are some where you don't have to. I would say JSN is a guy where you don't necessarily have to make this pairing because if you look, he can rack up PPR points and he's cheap. He's relatively cheap. He could get you to 20 fantasy points, which becomes 30 with the captain bonus. And he could get there without scoring a touchdown. It's a very viable path. So he's not a guy I think you need to pair with. DK Metcalf, it's, I think, harder for DK Metcalf to put up a slate-breaking score without bringing Geno along with him, both because of how DK Metcalf scores his points, a lot of long touchdowns, and that he's just more expensive. So I don't think you need Geno here. But I'm choosing to play Geno because I also kind of futzed around and made this lineup early. So that's my idea of where I'm going. And I think that, in this case, I'm betting on elevated passing volume, a pass-heavy game plan, and so that again makes Geno Smith as well more likely to find his way into the optimal lineup.
Absolutely. Okay, so we got Geno and JSN. So, 4 spots left. Where you want to go next?
So I don't want to spoiler it. Okay, next we're gonna say, okay, well let's look at the Lions side of things, and I mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown. as the Lions, sort of premier piece. He is. And I mentioned that I think the Seahawks pass defense a bit fraudulent. That one against them, especially the one against them for opposing passers, I think is fake because of who they've faced. Yeah. They've not faced good passing offenses. They're ranked first against opposing passing offenses at DraftKings, but like they haven't faced a passing offense.
I mean, really. Skylar Thompson, the Patriots, yeah.
And one of the reasons you play a guy like JSN at captain is because he's cheaper, and so you have extra salary to afford, say, putting in some guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown. And so I want to put in Amon-Ra St. Brown as, I think, the highest medium projection player of the game. Someone that I think is going to be a little hard to get to for players this week because there isn't a lot of value we feel highly confident in. And when I say value in Showdown, I generally define that as players priced below the kickers. There's not a lot of value that we feel highly confident in. So I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be, he's not going to be unowned, obviously. People are going to jam him in, but I think he's a little harder to afford than a stud on the slate where there is a clear value piece under the kickers. Like there's a clear guy at 1 or 2K who we think is highly likely to get 6 points. I just don't see that guy in this game. So I think it's going to suppress his ownership a little bit. And so he's a guy that I want to try and get overexposed to.
Yeah, and I love that just because, too, Amon-Ra St. Brown, he had that game earlier this year. I think it was the first game where he just didn't have a good game. And so maybe people are also just a little hesitant to pay that salary for him and say, maybe he's only going to get, maybe this is going to be a Jameson Williams game. I could see it. So maybe I'll just prioritize it. So really, you're almost, again, he will be owned, but maybe not as owned as like a classic stud like a Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, someone who people are just like, I'm playing him and I don't care what it takes.
Yeah, I could see him being like in the 40 to 50% ownership range overall, and like normally you'd see that kind of player in the 50 to 60% range. So it's not like he's going to be unowned, but that's a material discount in ownership. So I will take it.
Absolutely.
All right, next we are going to plug in one Jared Goff, and so in this case we're now you can see we're building for the shootout. Right, we're building for the high-scoring game. We're building for the game that says the Seahawks defense is actually bad. They just haven't, faced anyone good yet. And the Seahawks are going to be able, but their offense is good, and they'll be able to keep up through the air. Going through the air early and often against this pass funnel defense. So that's the story we're telling.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to plug in the last two fairly quickly because there's a tangent I need to speak to. So if we would, so we've got 5,200, not a ton of salary left. And so if we look at what's available, I can tell you, I've already mentioned there's no cheap punt plays I really like. And so I don't want to get into punt territory in this one. I don't want to do double kicker because I very, very rarely play double kicker. What I can tell you is there's one skill position player left who is on the field, full time, who is in our price range, and that's Tyler Lockett. So let's put him in.
Okay.
And then there's room for basically one of two choices, which are Bates, the Detroit kicker, or Noah Fant, who is in a somewhat unclear role where he might end up splitting a fair bit of time with Pharaoh Brown now. And I kind of go into that in the game write-up now that Pharaoh Brown is back from injury. So let's put in Bates.
All right. 3-3.
Now, this looks like a pretty solid lineup. However, I'm going to caution tournament players and say, if you're playing Showdown tournaments, you need to be aware of something. There's things you need to be aware of playing Showdown tournaments. In this case, this lineup is the current optimal lineup for a major projection service. If you go fire up these projections and just put them in an optimizer and hit run with no rules or anything like that, this is the lineup you will get. And what that tells you is it's probably a pretty solid lineup. What that also tells you is in the big tournament in a large tournament, there are going to be tons of this lineup entered. And in a small tournament, there's almost still certainly to be duplication. So this is something that if you want to be a Showdown tournament player, you kind of need to know. You need to know how to spot duplication or likely duplication. We can also see like $100 salary left. Look who we're playing. All these guys are big name players. Like you've got to be able to figure out where the ownership is going to go, where the duplication is likely to be. Because if you are entering a lineup that is duplicated a bunch of times, that is massively minus EV. And you can think about it and say, look, if I get first place and I split it 50 ways and I only get $5,000 instead of $200,000, like whatever, like I'm still happy with that. Sure. And absolutely, especially if you're only entering one lineup, like it'd be great to turn $15 into $5,000. But from an actual like expected value perspective, you're not competing. You're entering like the dollars you're entering and the number of people you're competing with means that that level of prize, if you're only playing for $5,000, your odds of winning it are so low that if you play this out 100 times, your expected value will be enormously negative. And yes, sometimes things will swing in your favor and you'll win. But if you can't figure out how to avoid enormous duplication in Showdown, you are going to be a losing Showdown player over time. And so that was the theme I kind of wanted to hit on this week, and why I did this lineup the way I did is I wanted to like highlight how we could get to this lineup without using an optimizer, and like the thought process we'd use, and then be like, but wait a second, there's something else you need to think about. And so I'm not saying you need to own like subscriptions to every projection service, and you know, and run them through every single time, but you need to be able to figure out where the ownership's going to go, what the common builds are going to look like. Our Discord is a great resource for this. If you're playing Showdown, you should be in there. People talk about like, what are some common builds going to look like for this one? You know, what should we do? What should we avoid? So that's a great resource to have if you want to play Showdown regularly. So I would just highly recommend like be in the Discord, look at ownership, think about where common builds are going to go. Now let's see where we can change this one around. So let's go back to just JSN and Gino for now. Okay. Now I actually don't remember what I had for my lineup I was going to actually submit. Let's put in one David Montgomery.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Detroit running game.
So now the story we're telling is veering a little bit away from aerial shootout, and what we're going to say is this is the Seattle's defense is fraudulent build, right? This is saying the Lions are going to be able to run all over Seattle. David Montgomery is the guy who he's the one whose volume gets more up there in games that Detroit wins rather than Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs, great player, explosive player, always a high ceiling, but his volume tends to remain steadier in different game scripts. Whereas Montgomery's the guy where like if they're up late, he's the guy they're gonna give it to kind of salt the game away. Like he's the guy who can get to the 20 plus carry mark, and Gibbs really can't. So we're going to say that, Lions are able to comfortably win the game on the strength of Montgomery, and he's going to get extra carries. They're going to have the ground game going. So we're kind of taking a pivot here from that chalk optimizer construction.
And I like how you did that with kind of just like spotlighting a critical part of the EV component. So, all right, David Montgomery, and so I'm guessing you want to put in some more Lions in this one.
Yeah, I suppose we probably should. I think we need more than one Lion, don't you think?
Yes, definitely.
So now we're going to put in my other favorite Lion for the slate, which is Jameson Williams. I think one of the things I like to do as the season goes along in the early parts of the season is I look at players and say, who's likely to be more expensive a few weeks from now? And JM introduced me to this concept of thinking about players like this. You know, like it's historically very profitable to be early on players, on teams, on identifying players or teams that are going to play differently than we've expected them to before the season. And so, that doesn't mean you're right that game, but you're just looking at, because it's hard to predict what's going to happen in one game. But what you're saying is, look, I think by the end of the season, this guy is going to be much more expensive because he's going to have had a really good season. And so I want to be on him early before everyone's jumping on him. I want to be on him, and I recognize that he might not hit this week, but that's okay. I'll just try to be early on him again next week. And so Jameson Williams, like he obviously had a really big week already in week 1, right? He smashed 121 yards and a touchdown against the Rams. But I think, that we're seeing a real breakout from him. And I think that the rest of the Lions are largely priced fairly because we know who they are. Jameson is the guy who, A, is priced a little cheaper than he probably should be. And B, he's the guy who it's his emergence that is making the Lions into the 49ers when it comes to picking players from their team. Yeah. I think the rest of the Lions they are who we think they are. Sam Laporta is a question mark in that like his passing game role has completely disappeared this season. I expect it will come back. In a small field tournament, it's kind of hard for me to go to Laporta. I think Laporta is a very interesting large field tournament play because I think that he's, the offense will swing around, right? Like regression to the mean will happen. Sam Laporta is a great player. But I think it's just in a small field tournament, it's a little harder for me to go there. So Jameson's my favorite because I think he's the one of these guys who I look at and say, of all the Lions offensive players, this is the one who's going to be $1,000 or $2,000 more in salary in 5 weeks.
Absolutely. Yep. And I can 100% see that as well. So, all right, 7,900 left per player rounding up. Where do you want to go next?
Yeah. So there's a few different paths we could take, right? And so we could build another Seahawk, and that's saying shootout. We could build in like another expensive Seahawk, rather like a Metcalf, or even if you want to be really bold, a Ken Walker. Or we could build in, it's like we have room for Amon-Ra St. Brown in this lineup if we want to. It's a little tough to envision playing a lineup with Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown that plays Smith over Goff, because if Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams both hit, it's likely that Goff is outscoring Geno Smith. So I don't think I want Amon-Ra St. Brown in this lineup as much of a awesome player as he is. I'm going to lean into where I put my quarterback chips, and I'm going to go DK Metcalf. And the concept here is that I have, because I have Geno Smith, in order for Geno Smith to beat Jared Goff, and it's always makes sense to me to compare the two quarterbacks to each other because of how commonly quarterbacks appear in winning showdown lineups. Again, unless you're building for under games, at least one quarterback appears in winning showdown lineups. I think it's like 75 to 80% of the time. I'd have to go look again, but it's the vast majority of the time, at least one quarterback appears in a showdown lineup. And so you have to look at these guys side by side and say, in this build, who am I betting is going to be the winner between those two? And this build, I'm betting Geno because I put him in the lineup. And so that means that I want to lean my pass catcher exposure a little more heavily towards the Seattle side. Because I need Geno to outscore Goff for this lineup to work. So Metcalf it is.
Absolutely.
And then our final choice, we only have a couple choices, really. A couple of viable choices. We have the kickers. We have Noah Fant. We can play one of the defenses. So let's talk through those really quick. The kickers, I think, are always viable options. I am more inclined to play a kicker when I can feel that, when I think about the team of the kicker I'm going to play, I'm more inclined to play a kicker on a team where I feel like the other plays on the team can have good games if the kicker also has a good game. As in, the kicker doesn't necessarily, kicking field goals doesn't steal too much production from the other players of that team that I have, right?
Yes.
Noah Fant I'm wary of just because Fant was playing almost all the tight end snaps for the Seahawks in the first 2 weeks while Pharaoh Brown was recovering from a knee injury. Then Fant got a little banged up. He entered week 3. He started week 3 with an injury tag. And then, excuse me, but he played. But he only played 40-something% of the snaps, and Pharaoh Brown also played 40-something% of the snaps. The Seahawks have a long history of rotating multiple tight ends throughout their lineups.
Oh, yes.
And so it's unclear to me if Fant's drop in snaps was due to the injury or due to Noah Brown Pharaoh Brown. I think it was probably due to Pharaoh Brown returning. And so I think that Fant is likely to end up in the maybe 50 to 60% snap rate at most going forward. And so he's not priced like that, right? He's priced like kind of an 80% snap tight end who is a okay pass catcher. So I don't think I love Fant. The defenses, I think, are tough sells for me here. And normally I like putting defenses in lineups where you kind of wouldn't expect it, because defenses can score points based off of touchdowns in ways that are unpredictable, and that people don't like to play them in that way. But in this case, the Lions defense is hard. The strongest negative correlation with defense is opposing quarterback. And so I don't love playing defense. If I had run JSN without Geno in this lineup, I'd be totally comfortable playing Lions D, because JSN can get there through volume without scoring a touchdown. But when Geno's in here and Metcalf, it makes it harder for me to want Lions D. And then we kind of built this lineup around the idea that Seahawks defense is a little bit fraudulent. Defense with a running back is a negative correlation. So I don't think I want Seahawks defense. I don't have Goff, which means I'm not projecting a ton of Lions passes in this one, because I only have one Lions pass catcher. So I'm not building this lineup around a ton of Lions passing. And we know that for defense to hit, what we really want is a lot of pass attempts, because pass attempts produce sacks and turnovers. So the player that makes the most sense to me is one of the kickers, and I'm going to go with Bates over Myers because I think I want a 3-3 build here. And also I tend to skew my kicker away from my captain because you need your captain to have a really big game. And every field goal kicked is a potential touchdown that captain could have scored and it's taken away. It's not like a hard and fast rule that I use, but kickers to me generally are kind of coin flips anyway. And so I'm going to put the Lions kicker. And if you want a couple of other kind of narrow things you can use to make the decision, I built this lineup around the concept of the Seattle passing game, being passive from the beginning, but also likely the Lions being able to run successfully against them. The Lions have the higher team total. When all else being equal, you generally want to lean to the kicker with the higher team total. And also, if you're thinking that the Lions are the Seahawks are point chasing here, which again, they're underdog, so at some point they likely are. You can find yourself in a situation where they could kick a field goal and decide not to go for it because they're in a situation where the field goal doesn't help them. And so, that's a really painful way to lose a showdown, I can tell you. When you're like, they're in field goal range. Yes, they're going to kick it. No, they're not kicking it. No. All I need is 2 points for my kicker. So, you can find yourself in a position where the Seahawks don't kick a field goal because they need to go for the touchdown. So I think Bates lines up best.
Love that. That just reminds me, last night I had a little single game parlay on DraftKings for the showdown game, and I had 3 of the legs hit, and I just needed 1 Josh Allen passing touchdown. And he had the only touchdown they scored in that game. It was a throw to Shakir, and he got tackled at the 1 yard line. And I would have hit, it was like a plus 1,300 money odds. So, I mean, those things just like you, I mean, like we talked about earlier, it's a game of inches, but great stuff, Xandamere, as always. And I mean, the thing I love about these videos is I feel like this content is pretty much evergreen, even though people will see, hey, this video was for this game, so it probably isn't relevant. I feel like you talk about so much conceptual stuff in here that you can go back and watch these videos even after the games are over, just to get a sense of, like, I mean, in this, you broke down, of, among other things, the different ways to think about which kicker to play, which is a problem that people probably run into all the time, especially when you're building a lineup with, like, if you don't have a ton of time and you're like got 20 minutes to throw something together, you're like, how do I know which kicker to pick? So this is great stuff. As always, appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, happy to. And I'm kind of trying to do that a little intentionally. Like I want this to be as helpful as possible for as many people as possible for as long a time as possible. And it's one thing just to be like, here's the lineup I'm playing tonight, but I feel like being able to talk through the strategy of why and how we think about it is, I think helpful and useful for people. I hope it is anyway. But as always, I said this a couple weeks ago, let us know if this is working for you. If you're finding this valuable content, what other themes we could get into, right? We're making this for you guys, our viewers. The idea, we're not making this just for me and cheese. We want to help you guys out. So let us know how we can continue to help you guys out.
That's right, guys. So let us know in the content or in the comments below. Xandamere, thanks always. Good luck tonight, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you. See you then.